She came home late again, the hallway light slicing the dark like a thin blade, her keys trembling just enough to sound like rain on metal, and for the first time the quiet between us felt heavier than her footsteps. The apartment was a study in gray that night, streetlights lacing the curtains, the hum of distant traffic hovering like a low fever, the kitchen table set for two and only one chair warm. I had stopped asking where she'd been, not because it didn't matter, but because every answer came back thin and breathless like steam on a mirror. Late meeting, I'm exhausted, you know how it is. The first lie in any marriage, if there is one, is never shouted. It is smuggled in the folds of ordinary sentences, riding home on the smell of someone else's cologne. I remember the first empty dinner like a small funeral, plates cooling under a film of air, and a candle that never got the chance to perform its simple task. She texted, running behind, eat without me, 3 words becoming the architecture of a new house I didn't want to live in. That night I ate slowly because chewing felt like a protest, because swallowing felt like complicity, because if I finished, the evening would be over and I would have to admit I was alone. The rain started in the courtyard, stitching soft needles into the soil, and the sound made guilt feel like weather, everywhere unsourced and old. I had always believed marriage was a patient river that could carry stones without complaint, but I hadn't counted on how stones multiply when no one looks. Distance came in polite shapes at first, new lingerie tags tucked carelessly into a shopping bag, a perfume sample that didn't match anything on our dresser, the sudden devotion to an athleisure brand we never talked about. She joked once, maybe I'm reinventing myself, and I kissed her shoulder and said, I hope you take me with you, and we both knew we weren't laughing. If love is a language, ours was turning monosyllabic. The discovery was not cinematic. It was domestic, a receipt folded into a pocket of the coat she never wore indoors, 2 items from a boutique called AP, an address across town, 1 timestamp that aligned precisely with a late meeting. I set the paper on the counter like a fragile insect and watched the kitchen light turn it into a witness. I told myself that intimate purchases can be an apology, a rekindling, an attempt to feel beautiful again for the one who knows you best. She walked in hair damp, eyes bright in a deliberate way, carrying a small matte black bag with a ribbon like a secret. The room smelled of coffee and rain. She smelled like a city at midnight. She touched my shoulder and asked, did you wait up? And I answered, I didn't know how not to, and only one of us heard the break in the middle of the sentence. She said she wanted to show me something, whispered it like a tease, and disappeared into the bedroom, the door closing with the careful quiet of someone who believes sound is the only tell. When she emerged, she didn't walk. She strutted like a stage had been rolled beneath her feet, wearing new lingerie that belonged to a room where I did not exist. Something about it, the cut, the confidence, the choreography of her fingers at the straps, felt rehearsed for a different audience, and all at once the apartment seemed too bright, too honest. She said, do you like it? And the question was too big for yes or no. It was a referendum on our last 6 months. I could feel my pulse in my hands, which is where men carry their vows when their mouths fail them. I nodded, and the nod felt like an alibi. She moved closer, the lace carving shadows across her stomach like crossed-out sentences, and I noticed a faint press mark on her collarbone, where a mouth that wasn't mine had written briefly in heat. Time slowed the way it does in accidents, every frame legible, none of them merciful. In the silence between her inhale and mine, the rain grew louder, as if the world were trying too late to warn us. The collapse was quiet. I reached past her and turned off the bedside lamp, then turned it on again, like flipping a coin, like asking fate to show its face. I said, who taught you to walk like that? And it was a small question with a large room behind it. She didn't answer at first. She touched my cheek with a kind of pity I could not bear. I wanted us to feel new, she said finally, which was not an answer but a door. I opened the top drawer of her nightstand and set the receipt beside her rings, then stepped back to watch the arithmetic finish itself. The color left her face, then returned as resolve, then left again as a tremor in the knees. Grief moves like weather in a person. She looked at me with a stranger's eyes, and I understood that honesty had arrived late and without flowers. The night didn't break, it thinned. She gathered a sweater, a phone, the small black bag, left the lingerie on and stood at the window, tracing the condensation with a finger as if rewriting the script. We'll talk, she said, and it had the lozenge polish of something practiced in another corridor. The rain slanted harder, and because I needed to save something from the wreck, I saved silence. Cliffhanger. She reached for the door, then turned back with a question shaped like mercy. Do you want me to stay? And the answer pooled in my throat, unspoken, heavy as the night between us. The hours after she left were made of coffee steam and floorboards, of the clock's resignation, and a phone that stayed face down like a guilty witness. Sleep didn't come. Instead, the apartment offered the small sounds of survival: refrigerator hum, distant siren, the whisper of rain that seemed reluctant to stop. Grief is not a wave, but a series of breaths you forget to take until your body demands them. Every room coached me into remembering. At 3 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table and folded the receipt like a flag for a country I no longer recognized. In the morning, the light didn't accuse, it clarified. Dust floated through the beam over her chair, the empty one, and settled on the rim of her coffee mug like ash. I cleaned the counter twice, then a third time, and found in the repetition a refuge from thinking. Around noon, I picked up her sweater from the back of the couch and pressed my face into it, and there it was. The other man, a cologne with the brittle brightness of winter pine, a scent that belonged to elevators and Monday mornings in other districts. He was suddenly everywhere without being anywhere, on the thread of a strand of hair I pulled from the pillow, in the extra text notifications she didn't bother to mute, in the new way she smiled like someone had painted a North Star into her chest. I wanted to hate him the way men in movies do, cleanly, with a plan and a deadline. Instead, I disliked him like a smell that won't leave your hands, no matter the soap. There was a business card in her tote from a parking space across town, his name embossed in restrained confidence, a font that telegraphed promotion and tidy desks. I read it once, then again, and placed it under the magnet shaped like a lemon on our fridge, because grief makes curators of us. The first call from her came at 2:17 p.m., and it rang out into the air until the room felt full of it. I let it go, then listened to the voicemail. I need to explain," she said, and her voice had the chalky softness of someone who hasn't slept and is trying not to ask for water. I didn't call back. I took a shower instead and watched the steam fog the mirror into a version of me I didn't have to recognize. Under the water, I tried to remember the last time we had touched without agenda, and the memory hid like a shy animal. In the days that followed, the apartment rearranged itself. Her slippers migrated to the corner as if ashamed. The plant she tended withered by degrees I could finally see. The bed learned to hold a shape it had not expected to hold. I went to work and typed emails that looked like compliance but were really prayers for distraction. On the commute, I watched people cradle their phones like birds, their screens alive with maps back to someone, and felt the ache of being unlocatable. Traces of the affair were not sensational. No perfume-slicked notes, no lipstick signatures, but procedural. Calendar invites labeled simply off-site, a rideshare receipt to a hotel conference room, a photo in her cloud where her smile was rotated 1 degree away from ours. I found a text thread with him, half deleted, the surviving line studiously bland. "Good to see you, that color, tomorrow, minimalism as cover." His messages sounded like an office with dimmable lights. Hers like someone tucking a secret into their own coat. If betrayal has a tone, it is the careful neutrality of people who are sure they are not the villains in their own story. There were 2 responses war inside me, panic and denial, and they took turns wearing my face. Panic cleaned the apartment at midnight and priced storage units. Denial made tea and arranged cushions, then Googled forgiveness like it was a recipe. In the quietest hours, a third voice, resilience, sat beside me like an old friend I didn't know I'd kept and asked simple questions. "What do you need right now? Where does it hurt least?" I started sleeping on her side of the bed, not as occupation but as archaeology, trying to understand the missing by lying down inside it. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It arrived as rain finally stopping and the morning light showing the apartment's corners without pity. I brewed coffee and didn't wait for her cup to cool. I drank both and felt, for a single minute, like a person occupying his own morning. It wasn't strength, it was practice. I wrote him a letter I never sent. "You don't know the rooms you're walking through," it began, or maybe you do. Either way, wipe your shoes. I wrote her a letter, too, one that started with our first apartment, cheap and bright, and ended with the night she strutted back into our life wearing a future in which I was optional. The letters didn't make me noble, they made me legible to myself. One evening I went to the address on the boutique's receipt, AP, a place that secreted velvet out of its walls, and stood outside watching women carry small black bags like private eclipses. I wasn't looking for her, I was looking for proof that intimacy could be bought without a receipt of guilt stapled to it. The window display was tasteful and merciless, and in the glass I saw my face layered over mannequins wearing confidence cut on the bias. I turned away when the lights dimmed, because some theaters should go dark without an audience. When she finally called again at midnight, I answered. Her breath was audible, the way someone's is when a story has grown too heavy to tell straight through. "Can we talk tomorrow?" she asked. "Come by," I said, "after work," and the phrasing made it sound like we were colleagues scheduling a debrief. Cliffhanger. After the call, I placed her mug back on the table and set 2 chairs facing each other, then turned off every light except one, as if truth preferred a smaller audience. She arrived at 6:12 p.m., hair pinned back like an apology trying not to look like one, rain on her coat shoulders beating into brief stars. The apartment had become a quiet chapel, the single lamp making a circle where two chairs waited for two people who had been practicing their lines separately. When she stepped inside, she paused at the threshold, as if asking the room for permission before asking me. "Thank you," she said, and it was unclear whether gratitude belonged to the doorway, the chair, or the chance to say what came next. I gestured to the seat and she didn't take it. She wandered to the window and watched the street like a screen. "I'm not going to lie tonight," she said, and it made both of us smaller and more human at once. She told me about him with a restraint that felt like respect and sounded like grief. He was handsome in the way calendars are handsome, neat, seasonal, replaceable, and funny in a way that made rooms feel efficient. "I didn't go looking," she said, "but I didn't run. The difference between falling and stepping is intention." She admitted to lifting one foot. I asked small questions because large ones would have flooded the room. "When did you know? Where did it start? How do we talk about endings?" She answered with dates that had names and places that had walls like any other. The conference room, the late lunch, the walk to the train where laughter fell into step with desire. "It felt like being seen," she said, and the sentence landed in me like a mirror that had finally learned to face the right way. There were parts of the story that were not for me, and she did not offer them. Dignity sometimes means letting your curiosity starve. I watched her hands anchor themselves around the mug I had set out, the steam writing brief, invisible messages on her cheeks. "I thought if I brought something home, if I could make you look at me like you used to, maybe the new could be ours," she said, nodding toward the bedroom she did not enter. "I did look at you," I said, "and saw you looking somewhere else." The room didn't flinch. It absorbed us the way rooms do when they've been trained by long winters. We talked about the quiet that had grown between us like ivy, pretty from a distance, choking if you let it. "I didn't say when I was lonely," she confessed, "because I wanted you to guess. There is a cruelty softer than anger. It is the kind where two people politely let each other disappear. We had been kind, we had been careful. We had been dying in the precise language of spreadsheets and calendars. The affair didn't start with heat, it started with warmth. We didn't touch. Touch would have been a detour, a way to pretend we still knew the road. Instead, we made sentences that tried to hold us upright. I told her about the receipt, the boutique window, the letter to him I never sent. "I'm not with him," she said quietly, "not anymore." The tense of anymore felt like a bridge that had been disassembled one plank too late. "He was an exit," she added. "I didn't notice it was a cliff." We both laughed once, not at the joke, but at the relief of a human sentence showing up. "Do you want to come back?" I asked, hearing how the question assumed there was a back to come to. She looked at the empty chair and then at the bedroom door and then at the window where rain was resuming its careful work. "I want to be honest somewhere," she said. That somewhere might have been here. It might have been a future apartment with unfamiliar cupboards. We talked about boundaries like we were negotiating the conditions of a ceasefire neither of us was confident enough to sign. Space or closeness, counseling or wistful competence, separate beds or separate lives. Each option was a country with laws we didn't know how to obey. When she stood to leave, she went to the bedroom and returned with the lingerie folded like a surrendered flag. "This doesn't belong to anyone anymore," she said. She placed it on the table between us, a small monument to the complicated ways people try to feel alive. I nodded and didn't move to take it. At the door, she paused with her hand on the knob and looked back the way people look back at houses they are selling, taking inventory of what can't be itemized. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I don't know how to live without being forgiven." Her voice trembled only once, like a thin glass catching a high note. "Cliffhanger." She whispered, "If you ask me to stay tonight, I will," and the apartment inhaled with me, waiting to see who we were now. Morning arrived not as an answer, but as a permission slip. The kind of pale light that gives you back your name without demanding a performance. The rain had worked all night and left the city rinsed. The courtyard plants stood at attention as if forgiven by weather. I brewed coffee slowly, filling the room with a smell that belonged to no one in particular and everyone who has ever needed to begin again. She had stayed, but not in the way staying used to mean. She slept on the sofa under the old gray throw, a distance that was precise without cruelty. The quiet between us had learned a new language overnight, something like truce, something like a winter you decide to outlast by learning the names of snow. When she woke, she folded the blanket with care, as if handling silk, and looked at me with eyes that knew better than to ask for the wrong. We didn't rehearse forgiving, we rehearsed honesty. "I don't know where this goes," I said, and the words felt like laying a map on the table that mostly contained oceans. She nodded, her hands wrapped around the mug like a small hearth. "I can look for an apartment," she said, and there was a gentleness in the way she made space even as it threatened to break her. Forgiveness, if it came, would not be a ribbon cutting. It would be a set of ordinary mornings in which neither of us demanded a verdict. The revenge I had imagined in the first hot hour, the cinematic, the brutal, the grand, had cooled into something adult. The refusal to injure either of us any further with scenes designed for audiences that don't exist. Letting go looked like washing two mugs and leaving one to dry on its own. She packed a small bag that contained more air than fabric. We moved through the apartment like careful ghosts, each touching only what belonged to us, each pausing at objects that used to be plural. At the bookshelf, she slid out the novel we'd tried to read aloud once, half of it marked with ticket stubs and the other half left aspirational. "Keep it," I said, and it felt like writing her name into the margin of a memory. When the rideshare arrived, we stood in the doorway like a photograph we wouldn't take. She touched my arm, not possession, not plea, just proof, and said, "I will be sorry longer than you will be angry." I believed her, which didn't fix anything and fixed the one thing that could be fixed: the past's insistence on being permanent. After she left, the apartment exhaled. I opened the windows and let the city's breath walk the rooms, lifting the curtains into small, private waves. On the table, the folded lingerie remained, quiet as a deed. I placed it in a paper bag and set it by the door for donation. Some objects are too articulate to keep. I wrote another letter, and this one I did send, addressed to the person I had been for the last year. I told him he had done his best with the tools he had, that vigilance is not love and guessing is not devotion, that sometimes losing is exactly how you stop being lost. I signed it with my first name, the way friends do. By afternoon, the sky had traded gray for a blue that didn't brag. I took a walk without destination and discovered that streets I had lived beside for years had been auditioning for my attention. A woman on a balcony shook out a blanket like a flag of truce. A child in yellow boots measured puddles as if they were planets. A man held a door without looking back. The world had not been waiting for my permission to remain kind. When I returned, the evening entered with its soft hands. I made a small dinner and ate it at the table that was now a singular noun, and the chair across from me was not a wound but a pause. The mug she'd used sat on the shelf, clean, mouth to the wall, a modest relic of a life that would continue in another grammar. I turned off the lamp and let darkness have the last word, which, as it turns out, is often quiet. Closure didn't arrive with a flourish. It arrived as permission to stop narrating everything to myself in the second person. I stood at the bedroom door and looked into the room we had made, the bed like a calm lake, the light like a promise that did not require a witness. In the morning, I would forgive her the way the rain forgives the city, not erasing what happened, but making it livable. Unresolved, quiet moment. Before sleep, I placed one pillow in the center and one at the edge, and lay down between them, listening for the version of my name that only I could say. Listening for the version of my name that only I could say.